Hello, welcome everybody to today's episode of Chasing the Dream. I am absolutely thrilled to have with us today Dr. Bill Sodeman is a certified business coach and he owns a corporate learning and development advisory service. He focuses on behalf of his clients with strategy, clear communication, and building strong collaboration across his clients' organization. So, Bill, welcome to Chasing the Dream.
Thank you, Ethan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Can we dive right into the pool and see if there's water?
Let's jump in.
Okay. Okay. Um, when we were talking before off camera, you were talking about when misaligning leadership happens, and you talk about that misalignment dragging organizations down. And I'm really fascinated with, could you share what misaligned leadership is all about and what are maybe some of the telltale signs to be on the lookout for?
Sure. Misaligned leadership happens when your your executives, your managers, your supervisors aren't living out the strategy, mission, and vision of the organization. It's almost like a whiskey tango foxtrot moment for people when they see what the leaders are actually doing. And then they look at the mission statement on the wall or the back of the business card or on the website, or they thumb through the strategic plan and they go, John is not living out the dream. He's not following what we had all agreed to as an organization and what we had built into our culture as the important things that we need to accomplish every day and the way we go about doing it. So
I would imagine that's incredibly toxic, is when people see that somebody on the leadership team isn't acting with the prescribed values that the organization supposedly shares. We see it play out all the time. And what's typically when you see that with an organization that's looking to work with you, how do you course correct on that? How do you address that deviation from what their stated culture is, their formal culture?
uh, drawing awareness to it usually isn't enough. It's important to get my clients over the hump, so to speak, and not only help them realize, yeah, this is a problem, that they need to realize how much this affects their operations, their revenue, their employee retention. They need to feel it from a holistic manner because people tend to compartmentalize. My favorite example is folks who go to the grocery store, and everybody goes to the grocery store or the supermarket. You've got 11 items in your cart, and there's nobody in the 10 item or less lane. So you make that gut call and say, yeah, let's see if I can get away with this. And leaders often end up in situations like that where they um, are pushing the envelope of what the organization's culture, mission, and values are going to allow. And they'll compartmentalize it as saying, I'm being innovative, or this is what strong leadership is about, or folks don't in the organization don't see things the way I see them. Um, it's a self-centered viewpoint that doesn't work well in an organizational context, especially when you've got a positive workplace culture that values collaboration and participation rather than people saying, I'm king of the hill.
That makes perfect sense to me, but how do we take what you just said, which is people at the top needing to demonstrate the values that they want to see emulated? But something else you say makes me wonder about that. You talk about culture being developed from the bottom up,
Hmm.
that it's the people who interact with your customers and the people who collaborate together who create the culture. So what happens when those are not aligned, the behaviors of somebody or more than one person on leadership, and those people who are tasked with following and in their actions creating a great place to work? Like, how do you work through that?
Great question. And it comes back to collaboration and coming to a common understanding of how we express the culture and values of our organization. It's one thing to say, um, you know, Boston Beer Company used to say, we brew great beer. And then they went off and created this long list of values, which are really interesting values. Um, but it's one thing to have that list of values. It's the other thing to internalize it and put it into your own language and say, one of my favorite examples is the janitor at one of the space centers during the space race in the 1960s, and somebody asked him what he did every day, and his response was, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." And people need to see that sense of purpose and the end results in what they do, because again, we tend to compartmentalize what we do and trivialize it and scope it down so that our brains can actually deal with it. um, Getting executives and leaders to understand what the entry level of the organization goes through is it's a real challenge. We used to have TV shows like Undercover Boss, where people would disguise themselves and go into the trenches and see what was it like to work behind the counter, or what was it like to work behind the registration desk at a hotel, or to deal with people at a call center. And sometimes it takes that much of a reality check. There was one organization I was a member of where the executives regularly went on the program floors to not only see what it was like, but to feel what it was like. There are plenty of airline CEOs who fly coach as part of their job, just to get a sense of, okay, here's what it's like to wait for the plane. Here's what the passengers go through. It's one of the warning signs I typically look for is if there's an executive dining room. If there's an EDR or some sort of segregated area where the executives are, that's a sign.
It sounds like to me the proliferation of a caste society, almost like first class or untouchables. It sounds like when you're creating artificial, barriers
Yeah.
between that you're saying that's dangerous. I want to ask you something on a follow-up on that, because I understand what you're saying in terms of leadership needing to remain in close proximity to be there for frontline staff, but what just happens organically? What do you notice as organizations grow and they start to fill in the layers of bureaucracy we know and love called middle management?
Hmm.
And so they're literally creating buffers between leadership and frontline staff. So how do you create that transparency where people see what the values are, they know what the values are, and leadership can communicate back so that the message doesn't get lost?
I love that visual that you just brought up in my head about transparency. And speaking as a
Mhm.
recovering middle manager, I one of the
Sorry.
it's all right. It's all right. It's a daily struggle, but I'm up for it, and I'm smiling now. I can talk about it, so it's great. Um, the transparency analogy is so appropriate because, in the United States and in Canada, we have such a thing as triple paned windows. And you can see through them perfectly fine. They're three sheets of glass, spaced out, and triple pane windows help keep the heat in your home or during the winter, and the cold in your home when you're air conditioned during the summer, so it doesn't leak out through the window. But if you start putting in more and more panes of glass, the more distorted everything gets. And that's similar to what you were talking about with adding those layers of middle management. And it seems to be cyclical. Since the pandemic, and certainly in these uncertain economic times, there have been layoffs at the middle management level where companies grit their teeth and say, we can flatten the organization, and inevitably the organization bloats up again. It's I am always amazed by how organizations tear themselves down and pull themselves back together again in terms of bureaucracy. Um, so how do we transmit those cultural changes through all of that interference, through that lack of transparency? It is tough. I'm old enough, I can remember back in the day, oh, we'll put stuff on the bulletin board or on the newsletter and people will understand. Then we had intranets, and that sort of helped a little bit. Social media came into play, and all of a sudden, the office water cooler talk, you could do it on Facebook. You could do it through other channels. People might, tape videos at work in TikTok and post them, and occasionally some of them go viral, and it's horrible. Um, so there's a lot more of the communication inside of the company that the organization can no longer control. They can write all the policies and procedures they want, but that doesn't stop people from making videos and doing posts and the information just getting out there. Once it's out there, it's hard to pull back.
I'm fascinated with this idea of containing internal through transparency to communicate with your employees, and also how you tie that into communicating externally to outside stakeholders. And I'm fascinated. You've talked about an organization, if they realize that there's a disconnect between what they want to communicate as far as their values, their vision, their mission, and how they're being perceived. You talk about small changes in
Hmm.
strategy and operations being able to positively impact culture. Like, what are some of the things that you find more often than not you're advising clients saying, look, we're not going to change the whole organization overnight, but here's some kind of like low-hanging fruit that you could do to start to improve culture if you've noticed that the culture is starting to be flawed.
Yeah. Um, yeah, thanks for that question. The small changes piece is really helpful in one sense to give people hope that change is possible. Um, I am a distance runner. I've been running for 50 over the course of 50 years, but not all of those 50 years. Inevitably, I will get tired and stop running for a few months, and then I have to get back on the treadmill and start up again. So I know what I'm in for when I start running again. It's a slow ramp up of small changes that inevitably, if I follow my plan and my program, lead to some big time results. And the same thing goes for organizations. There are small changes that we can make in the way we communicate internally or the way we collect metrics and benchmarks. I've seen organizations and been part of organizations where the metrics and benchmarks were that were used were the most convenient ones to use.
Like what? I mean, what are you typically looking at when you say, okay, here are the benchmarks to compare yourself against other organizations who
Yeah.
have a strong culture? Like, what are you telling them to focus on?
Looking at revenues and expenses and comparing them across organizations isn't enough. Same thing with ROI.
Mm.
Um, I could trot out that old chestnut that every organization is unique, and to some degree it's true, but there are, best practices and comparables that we can find and use for benchmarking. Um, and it's at some point we have to take ownership of the metrics that we've got. And what's a good way of putting this? Um, you know, Reveal the metrics that don't make us look so good. And
Why would I want to reveal things that don't paint my organization in the most favorable light? Why don't I just ignore those things that seem problematic?
um, well, if we don't measure it, we can't change it.
Okay.
If
So, and that's the pushback I get all the time. And I was so excited to have you on the show today is to kind of give some pushback against the argument of, well, culture's warm, fuzzy, feely, but you can't measure it in terms of financial impact. How do you address that? I'm curious how you address that argument. Those people who say, you know, culture, it's all about performance. It's all about every month how we perform financially, where they are looking at the financials.
yeah. And yeah, there is no one numeric measure that gives us wisdom about culture, but there's a constellation of measures and best practices that we can use. We can look at employee retention. We can look at
Mm.
how employees engage in the case of learning and development with learning management systems and attend courses and the kinds of feedback that employees give. We can look at revenues and returns on investment for programs, departments, and strategic business units. Um, while there isn't one measure of culture that we can use, we can come at it from a variety of different ways and say, okay, financially, here's where we're at. In terms of best practices, here's where we're at. Now, some of this information is qualitative, which does make things a little tough to analyze. But one of the nice things about the advent of generative AI is it's become much easier to take qualitative data and pull it together into cogent summaries that are either written or they can be quantitative. So, and that's a big change from when I was writing my dissertation back in 1993 and had to write my own software to try to analyze the qualitative data in a quantitative way. Um, and I've been meaning to find my old data and run it through ChatGPT just to see how far off of reality I was.
Or to what extent you were spot on.
Yeah,
You said something that makes me kind of scratch my head because
sure.
I'm a technological laggard. So this whole AI thing, you've explained to me generative. I still don't know that I get it, but I wanted to ask you, you talked about trends and innovations like artificial intelligence, like cloud computing. That gives you now the tools that you can talk to your clients about using those kinds of technological advancements for some kind of positive organizational change. Like, to what extent, without asking you to get all Wizard and Oz and reveal your what's behind the curtain, what do you do specifically with AI or cloud computing to say, here's the data that supports this idea of culture is important for competitive advantage? Like, how do you quantify that? Because I don't know any other way to resolve that pushback when people
Mhm.
say, oh, there's no data doesn't support it, this is all wishful thinking.
Um, Love this question. One of the big pieces that I like to remind executives about with technology is, does this technology bring us closer to the customer? The closer to the customer we
Mm.
get, the better of a relationship we should develop, and that should yield better customer retention and more revenue per customer, rather than running up the costs and say, oh, we've got to spend X out, a multiple of X to get new customers and we churn through them. Far easier to keep a customer and and keep a customer happy by fulfilling the needs that they've got and the needs that they didn't know they had. And that's a big one. That's what I love about artificial intelligence is the ability to brainstorm with the systems. I love to have Gen AI systems ask me questions rather than me ask them questions. if Google Gemini or ChatGPT can interview me, and I start to say, I'll give it a prompt, say, ask me 5 questions about X, and then collect my answers and ask me another round of 5 questions. It's sort of it's a variation of, in academic research, we call it the Delphi approach, where you do a survey, collect the answers, then change the questions and send out another survey and hope everybody gets back to you. Easier to do it in ChatGPT or Gemini because it's nice and instant and fun. It's a great way to spend an hour where have the agent interview you. Um, and I would actually go as far as to say you could run an interesting online workshop where you show people in your organization how to use these techniques for continuous improvement.
What I'm picking up on, if I understand this, is the power of probing the intelligence
Hmm.
to come up with ways to measure your customer satisfaction with your organization, its
Yeah.
service, its processes, policies. Like, I get that. Now, how do you then take that piece of learning and say, okay, employees, we're going to measure your success in delivering customer satisfaction as a gauge of great culture? Like, how do you tie that back? Because ultimately, your employees determine customer satisfaction, right, in their interactions.
Hmm.
How do you kind of bring that knowledge from the tools back in and then disseminate it with the people who are doing the work?
Well, one of the things that, in our imaginary conversation with the GPT is we're brainstorming as well as identifying metrics that we could develop and metrics that we already have regarding customer satisfaction. Um, One thing I've learned is that people are rational, but they also love to take the shortcut to get things done. Why drive around the corner when you can drive through the gas station parking lot? And there's some people who do this all the time, at a high rate of speed. Wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it, working with AI systems in particular is a great way to take fewer shortcuts, which seems counterintuitive because people see Gen AI as the ultimate shortcut. Oh,
Yeah.
I can
Right.
generate this draft really quickly. But if you use a technique where the AI is interviewing you, you end up with a longer, deeper conversation. And some of this relies on how you write the prompts. And this is something I love to work with people on is this brainstorming ability because you can do it anytime. You don't have to wait until your colleagues are ready necessarily. The AI is always there and available for you. Um, but getting back to the thrust of the question, w- w- we want to shift the conversation away from productivity necessarily and return on investment to what's best for the customer and the organization. And you want a sustainable organization. And again, it comes down to mission, values, and strategy. You know, people need to people need to be inside the organization and outside the organization need to be willing to make that emotional, financial commitment to the organization. They need to feel it.
And how do you in your practice, or how do I, as maybe a compassionate leader, make the people in my organization feel the critical imperative of exhibiting the values that are necessary to deliver exceptional experience to the customer when I, as an employee, maybe I've seen you initiate layoffs, force me back to
Mhm.
work. You don't solicit my ideas or my ways of fixing my work. You don't trust me to give me autonomy. Um, you're not soliciting my feedback at all. But now all of a sudden you're saying you've got these AI tools that have told you what I need to do to serve the customer. I'm silent quitting or I've emotionally checked out.
Mhm.
How do you fix that? Because to me, that's the most toxic aspect of this when you've let it go wrong.
There- it- it's easy to let things go wrong. One way to let things go right is to acknowledge that the path to success runs through failure. It's not an either or option where we fail or we succeed. We have to fail continually to get to success, which sounds a little demoralizing until you realize that if you continue to fail, you will pinpoint how you're deficient. Whereas if you fail once, then you fail once, you give up, and you haven't really done anything to pinpoint where your deficiencies are. Um, and we need, as organizations and executives, need to give people the grace to fail. Um,
What do you mean by grace to fail? Because I think I know what that means, but
yeah.
for the uninitiated, or what does that mean when you
Um,
allow people to fail? What does that look like?
Let people take risks, in a limited way. There need to be boundaries on it. An administrative assistant doesn't need to be signing $100,000 contracts. But at the same time, we need to give people, um, you know, specific scopes of where they've got some flexibility. And this even happens down, at the customer facing pieces of the organization. There are hotel chains that, you know, give employees a discretionary amount of money to fix a situation with a customer right on the spot. And for these chains, they're higher end prestige chains. Having to go up the ladder and say, "Hey, can I do this?" Even those moments may lead to losing the customer. So when I talk about the grace to fail, it's letting employees know that, we have this expectation in Western management that everything has to be perfect and perfectly done. And we all know that doesn't happen. So why not acknowledge that we've got to fail until we succeed?
That brings back the age-old Edison, I
Hmm.
didn't fail 10,000 times to invent the light bulb. I just learned what didn't work and
Hmm.
I course corrected. I
Yeah.
did something else. I hear what you're saying, and I believe that it's a unicorn. I believe it's something that many organizations give lip service to employee autonomy or power to pull the stop cord, that whole Six
Hmm.
Sigma
Oh yeah,
thing.
Kaizen.
And
Yeah.
yeah, but they don't in practice. The fear of retribution, the fear of doing something wrong and being punished, that appears to me to be still pervasive. And I'm wondering if what you're saying is to get to an amazing culture, you have to give people the autonomy to take those risks.
Yeah.
And almost the taking of risks is in and of itself a culture transformation, no?
Yeah. And fear is a learned reinforcing behavior. Um,
Well, wait, say that again.
fear itself is a learned and reinforcing behavior. There are some
Fear.
things that we fear right off the bat, like, a candle flame. All it takes is touching a flame once or twice for a kid, and they realize, ooh, fire bad. And then, the fear builds in their head after a while. Oh, if a candle flame is bad, then a wood fire is bad or a bonfire is bad, and putting a house on fire is really bad. So, um, in an organization, it only takes a few painful episodes with fear to turn employees away from fully actualizing the mission, values, and culture and strategy of the organization, especially if it's very much a command and control organization, which is,
Yeah.
Theory X is the default mode for running organizations because it's seen as easy. It's easy for the supervisors. It's not easy for the people actually doing the work.
It almost sounds like you're saying that in far too many organizations, punishing the whistleblower creates de facto silence. But what did you mean by theory X? Is there like a theory Y, like theory
Oh yeah.
XY?
Yeah, Theory X is a command and control organization. Theory Y is an organization where people buy in to their level of commitment. Um, and there are other identifiers like Theory Z, Theory J, but X and Y are the ones that I usually compare because if X is command and control, then Theory Y is more behavioral, which is, and getting people to buy into an organization is a more complex negotiation. And it's one moment by moment and day by day. As you put it earlier, what happens when you see a leader doing something that doesn't align with the mission, culture, values, and strategy?
Yeah.
Like we were talking about earlier, it's a whiskey tango foxtrot moment. Do you call it out and you know speak truth to power, or do you bite your tongue and say, well, maybe this is the way it really is here? Um, a, a resilient organization that is committed to its mission, values, culture, and strategy can take the criticism.
I would almost imagine that organizations that are built to last are built on the ability to solicit that kind of constant feedback and
Mhm.
act on it. Um, that would just be my observation. So, Bill, you've obviously been doing this thing for a while, learning and developing, coaching organizations, creating great places to work. Where do you see Bill Sodeman next year? Like, what are you looking at the horizon and kind of planning for your own consulting practice and also for the state of learning and development and culture transformation?
One thing that I prioritize in my advisory services in the business coaching is, identifying what is important to the client and to the organization. And I think over the next year, we're going to see more focus on the macro level of the economy. It's certainly affecting organizations and customers in very profound ways, especially in the United States. Another concern that organizations and employees have is it's going back to the trust piece. Can we trust our social institutions? It's a big one. We've got protests on the streets based on trust. Some organizations and corporations have come under scrutiny because they've scrapped their DEI programs or renamed them, or have decided to exit specific markets based on the direction the government is going, rather than stick with their plans and honor their mission, culture, values, and strategy. So I think what I'm looking forward to over the next year is working with more organizations that are doubling down on the commitments that they've already made. We've seen this happen with universities who've rejected deals with the government to remake their policies and in ways that are antithetical to what universities do. I see this trend continuing with organizations and corporations. If you want to work with the federal government, you've got to do X, Y, and Z. Um, so that's going to be an interesting piece of my work over the next year, is helping organizations come to grips with this.
Bill, you said so many things that personally resonate with me, but also I'm sure our audience. So if somebody's sitting here listening to what you said and they say, yeah, we're at the point in our organization's life cycle where we need to realign our vision and our strategy and our culture. And Bill, we'd like to reach out to you to help us or to have a conversation. How would they get in touch with you?
Hit my website at n3ed.com. That's n, the numeral 3ed.com. It's got a scheduling link on every page where you can book some time with me. No
Okay.
obligation. I love to talk with people about what their current challenges are and the opportunities that they've got. You can also email me at bill@n3ed.com. Very, very quick way to get a hold of me too, because I'm checking my email constantly. Um, and hit me up on the socials, LinkedIn, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, and I check those responses pretty frequently too. So there are a lot of ways to get a hold of me, especially if you're interested in honoring your organization and powering it through all these weird changes that we've got going on right now.
Yeah, but there sure is a lot to
Yeah.
contend with. And I love how you kind of just wrap that up in a nice Tiffany bow of talking about honoring commitments and being true to what the culture of your organization is. So to those folks who maybe didn't write it all down, I'm going to put all of Bill's contact details in the description below. So reach out to Bill, like the video, that'll help get some additional exposure. And Bill, I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on Chasing the Dream today and sharing your expertise. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, Ethan. You're so easy to talk to, and I hope the viewers and listeners got as much out of the conversation as I did.
I'm sure they did. So thank you, everybody. And stay tuned for the next episode of Chasing the Dream. But until then, take care and keep struggling to fight the good fight and build amazing workplace cultures. Thank you.